Hello, Spark fans, and welcome back to Advancing Spark, where this week we're going to have a look at how we take the new Databricks SQL Analytics environment and how we plug it into things like Power BI, Tableau, Click, Looker, all that kind of stuff. Essentially, how we take the SQL endpoint, the new, easier to use, slightly kind of optimized clusters, and then plug them into these things that we're already using. And it's one of the big questions that we had the moment we started talking about it. People were saying, can you see that in Power BI? How do I connect to that? Is the connection different if we go that way or that way? And it seemed a lot of the questions were around that kind of experience. So I thought we'd start there. And we'll do a load of videos about looking at the different aspects of SQL Analytics over the next few weeks. But this is number one. So let us know down below if you've got any questions about how SQL Analytics works, what it plugs into, what you should use each bit for. And we'll try and get to them in videos. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. And again, I don't care. I'm festive. I know it's not quite December yet, but I thought I'd decorate. I thought I would get into the festive mood. And it's been a long year. It's fine. Just celebrate a little early. It'll all be okay. So, no apologies. Right. Moving on. This is SQL Analytics. So this is the new workspace that we've got. Now, don't worry if you cannot see this yet. It is in public preview, but it's in a gated public preview. So you still need to go to the Databricks website, you need to sign up for the preview, you need to be enabled for the preview. It's not quite at the production level where it's you know what, thousands and hundreds of thousands of queries can hammer this thing at once, because it is a load of new tech that they put together to support this. So don't worry if you can't see it just yet. I'm sure you'll be seeing it at some point soon. So to get here, again, I came from my data science and engineering workspace, also known as the normal Databricks workspace. So if you're familiar with Databricks, you're normally used to seeing this. Over here, we've got the SQL Analytics workspace. So it's this different workspace that we're going to for this kind of SQL Analytics-y, for the SQL Analytics workloads. Yeah, I mean, that's why they named it that. Kind of makes sense. And the main thing that we need here is an endpoint. So endpoints are the SQL Analytics version of clusters. They are exactly the same. They are just Spark clusters. Except they're wrapped in a bit of abstraction. They're made easier to see. We can kind of we don't have to think about what VM sizes, what kind of driver workers, how many of them autoscale, any of that. We just say, I would like a cluster, please. I would like this one to be small. 2 times extra small, medium, large, whatever it happens to be. T-shirt sizing clusters to move away from the complexity of choosing how big a cluster you should be. Essentially saying, let them optimize all the jobs so you don't have to be thinking at that lower grain, which your business users, your report consumers, your data analysts kind of just putting some SQL together aren't going to be thinking about that kind of deep Spark performance stuff. So it kind of makes sense. Okay, so we've got our cluster spun up and we need to connect to Power BI. So Power BI sitting ready to go, saying, where do you want to get your data from? So if we go into get data, and again, this is going to use the same connector that we've done in the previous video. This is the Azure Databricks connector. So if we go into Azure, got Databricks down there, I'm going to say I want to connect, and it's going to ask us for some details. Now, if you've used Databricks with Power BI and Tableau and all that kind of stuff before they put out some specialist connectors, you had to use a Spark connector, and you had to kind of assemble a URL out of different parts of your advanced cluster configuration settings. And honestly, any kind of reporting user will be looking and going, I don't want to go to Spark clusters, advanced settings, JDBC settings, and then start having to assemble a URL. Madness. And this kind of it sounds a little bit like it, but it's much easier. So we've got server host name, we've got a HTTP path. They're the 2 things that we need. And if we go back to SQL Analytics, if I go to my connection details, so your users need to know, they log in here, they go to endpoints, they pick which endpoint based on the size of what they can see, and they go connection details. And then in here they go, I've got my server host name and my HTTP path. That's the 2 things it's asking for. So server host name, take that in. I want to take my HTTP path, take that, put that in. And that's all the kind of the server location config that we actually need. Now we can choose a specific Hive database. We don't need to, we can browse them. We can use the batch size to optimize how often, how many round trips it takes when it's kind of retrieving data. And really importantly, we can choose whether it's import or direct query mode. So are we going to write a query, poke it at some tables, and it's going to do a full select star from all those tables and bring it into the Power BI service or desktop. And then any queries I do, any kind of dashboarding, any slices and all that kind of stuff, is just going to serve data locally from Power BI. And that means I need to be able to fits my whole data set inside Power BI, which can have limitations. We're talking about, a gig, 10 gig, large on premium, depending on how you're fitting it in. But essentially, you will reach limits in terms of how much data you can get in there, especially if you're building out a big data system using things like Spark. Direct query, it's every time I chop and change data, every time I drag something new in, every time I apply a different filter, it's going to have to go back and rerun that query against Databricks, get a new result set and return that, which means it's slower. There's latency. Each time you make a change, it has to go back, think about something, bring it back, but we can serve petabytes of data. You can get much bigger served from Databricks than you can from a Power BI model locally. Kind of makes sense. In memory is expensive. Kind of how it works. So at this point, we're going to use import, but I'll show you some of the differences as we go into it. Click OK, and it'll ask us how we want to connect. So username and password. I don't think that works in Azure. Personal access token. So how do we actually want to go and connect? And that's the traditional way of working. And it used to be that your users would have to, again, go into admin settings, go into user settings, like generate the token. And again, it's a little bit off-putting. Now we've kind of got this hidden on your screen, this personal access token. So if they're in connection details, I'm like, what's that personal access token? They come back here. Nice little button just saying generate one. So you can click on that. Same screen that we previously got. So I can say, I want to do my Power BI. How long should it live? 1 day, because I don't want all of you logging onto my query. I click on generate, and it's going to give me my token. So I take that, take it away, paste it in there. Fairly straightforward. Even more useful, much more user-friendly is I want to use Active Directory. Click that, it'll open up an Active Directory connection. You choose your user, log in, and log in as you, and it's really straightforward. In this case, going to stick with the PAT, which is fine. Kind of depends on, if you're in the right tenant, if you need to remove tenants. Actually, even that should be completely fine. So yeah, that's the way it works. Okay, so that has connected successfully. I can see that, so it's found that workspace. It said I'm talking to Spark, which kind of makes sense. And then it's given me my list of Hive databases. These are databases that I pre-registered with the SQL Analytics endpoint, or actually just my Databricks workspace on a whole. It's using the internal Hive for that cluster. I can just see what is on there. So I can see that full list. Now, these are just Hive databases and tables. And that's super important because that's one of the big questions that we had. So let's dive back into SQL Analytics. If we have a look what we've got, you've got this whole section called queries. Now in here, we can write bits of SQL. We can actually like snippets of SQL that describe aggregated data sets that we can use in the SQL Analytics dashboards. So I've got my global sales, which is just a bit of SQL I can write and say, this is how we aggregate up these things, how we join these things together. I've got some which are kind of just doing slightly more, it's summing up. I can actually see the results. So in this case, we're doing a sum, we're doing a group by, and is making an aggregated set. And for each of these data sets, I can save it. I can tell it how often to refresh that data set. So that's now an unattended refresh when I come in. That's why without me having done anything, it's got a load of, you can't really see the data very well there. Don't get show results only. It's got a lot of data that's pre-cached from when this ran last night, which is great. And I can just use that in my dashboards. I can see those visuals. I can play around with those visuals without having to have rerun this query, which is great. Again, I didn't know that long ago. It was quite fresh. And now when we first kind of we got a load of questions going, ooh, so those queries I use to build snippets, these building blocks. Essentially, I'm building out a data model by saying, well, take that query and the results of that, take that query, and then assemble into a dashboard. Can we access those via things like Power BI and Tableau? No. That looks bad. I don't know if they plan it in the future, but currently you can't. So the only thing you can see when we're inside Power BI is a list of things that have been formally registered as Hive objects. Now, these are all sitting in the lake. So these aren't in DBFS. They're not kind of save as table, kind of managed Spark tables. These are Hive external tables pointing at Delta tables that I've got stored in my lake. So we are, essentially, Databricks here is kind of acting as this abstraction layer, allowing Power BI to query Delta in the lake and then returning results and doing that crunching. But it does not show me those queries. And that kind of makes sense because when you think about it, they are big, they are aggregated. They're meant to be rolled up result sets that are used to just immediately put into some visuals, which, they're not really thinking about, in that one, I want to cut and slice it by that. In there, I want to cut and slice it by that. It's not as choppy and changey as a full BI model would be. And certainly when we look at a big one, so if I take taxi trips, which is over a 84 million row data set, then it's going, no, that's too big. You can't bring 84 million rows back. We've truncated it to 20,000 for you. Just because that's not what it's for. It's not trying to say, basically recreate my Hive data structure and then just drag and drop queries. It's write some SQL that produces some aggregated data sets that you can use in some visuals. That's kind of what it's aiming for. So it kind of makes sense that you then can't expose these things into Power BI, which is then expecting to do its own chopping and changing and filtering and slicing. But, it is a limitation. The one thing that you can do, which I don't know if you should do, but you can do, is actually this does support full SQL, so I can say, what am I in NYC taxi? I want to do my summary view. I can do that, run that, and that's just going to go and add a view. Now, one thing a lot of people have missed is this little button down here. So, can you go in and go, why isn't my stuff showing up? I've added summary into here, but I can't see it. Hit that little refresh button. That'll go and requery Hive, go, what's actually in there? And I can now see I've got that summary view. And because that is a Hive view, it's a Hive object, that would then be something I can then go and see and explore. I need to refresh this list. And I should then be able to go and see that object saved within my Hive query, NYC taxi, and I've got a summary. So it's kind of like you can expose these things. If you give your users permissions to create objects, then they can go and create their own objects and use them within Power BI. Just be a little bit careful, because obviously that means they're then able to create registered Hive database objects that everyone else can see. So it's a little bit how you use it. It's not the finest way of doing it, but it does support being able to do stuff like that. Generally, this is meant for select statements. This is meant for building out a curated list of aggregated data sets for putting into visuals. But you can. But should you? Anyway, so, okay, back to Power BI. I want to do a real quick thing. I'm going to say order details, products, bring them into my model. It's going to go off. Because I'm using import mode, going to do a quick query over it. It's going to select it in. So going to import those rows. Waiting for the query, pushing it back to the endpoint, bringing it in. I've now got my tables. Again, I'll just do something really, really quick. So create the relationship on product ID. Okay, it's happy. And then I can do, your super basic. Just create I want to see the name. I want to see the total amount. And it's nice and quick because it's imported. And that's, basic Power BI. We're not going to go into anything further than that for basic stuff. I don't know why I've got so many blanks, but so if you're trying to do a normal Power BI thing and using import mode, that's fine. And actually behind the scenes, what we can actually see is we've got this history. So we can go and see what actually happened now, and we can see when it was doing that refresh of those tables, we can see what it was doing. So it's doing that select of all the product things. I don't know why that's not. To take that and to put it into a notepad, that classic SQL query writer, and say what's actually going on in there. And all it's doing is just writing a select star really from product. So when it's doing that refresh, that's all it's doing. It's just pushing a select star, giving all that data. Doing the same for my sales, bring all that back. So input mode, there isn't that much you can get from your history. You're just seeing it's going off and it's refreshing that data. Cool. Great. What if we do something a little bit more fancy? So I've got another one. Here's one I made earlier. And in this case, I've got a few things. So I've got NYC taxi. So that kind of the same big kind of taxi data set, which is 84 million rows for 2019. So I've got a fairly chunky data set. And then I've got two different state dimensions. So I've just brought the same date dimension in. One is using direct query. One is using import mode. So in here, so for my DQ dates, I've got that in direct query. And for my import dates, I've got that using import mode. Just to show you kind of the difference between if you're using direct query, kind of what you see on the other side, what you see actually hitting that SQL endpoint. And then the difference between when it's got the full context of that query with import and sort of both the trips and dates table, and then when it just has this context and it's fed in some stuff. And it kind of works in a similar way. So the message is more, don't worry too much about it. Okay, so in this case, let's go for, say I want my calendar months. Again, so that's great, nice and quick. And I can say I want to see my total amount. that goes off, and that's gone and got data for me. Again, that was far quicker than I expected it to be. And then I'm going to go and bring in a quick report filter and say, I just want this to be, and let's go 2019 to 04. Go off. Okay, there we go. That's one I've not hit before. So it's going off, running it, brings back my results set. That makes sense. And then we do another one. So let's go and get on the other side of things and say, I want to see this one's calendar month. Again, that's using my imported one. So let's use my local one and do the same and just get my total amount, bring it in. There we go. So that's filtering across. Okay, so I've got my, kind of see both sides of things and how that's working. That might be a bit weird because I've got both filters on at the same time. Let's see what that looks like. Over in my queries, I'll be able to refresh this and I'll be able to see what's going on. So we can see those different selects coming in. So I can see this one was going in. Again, get my Notepad query viewer up. Hoping there's like a little drag button I'm just missing there, but okay, so this one is doing that, go and select. It's doing that where calendar month equals, so kind of it knows it's trying to do that filtering, and it's doing the join inside that query. So that's passed, it's wrapped the whole query up and it's passed it back in. And that means if we go into the details, we've got this kind of open button, which essentially just shows us a Spark UI. So I can go and say, what are you actually doing? And we can see, happy days, this is doing dynamic partition pruning. So because it's got the full context of that query, saying, well, I'll do a query on that, take that, pass that across, push that in, do that list, push it through. So it's actually sort of working quite nicely to be able to go and do that kind of cross-filtering. That is what I'd want to see if I'm building something that's performant. It's not having to go and do a full scan of the entire 84 million rows. It's doing how many rows does it bring back? 7 million, which makes a lot more sense why it was so much faster. And then we have a look in the next one it's doing. So I think this should be the other one. Let's see what's going on in there. So, oh yeah, it's wrapped it in that query. Ugh. Okay, so that's because I've done the same one. And it's having to do a slightly different thing. So it's pulling it out and it's essentially, I think it'll be easier if I show you this query without the other relationship in. So let's go and just ruin my data model. So we go, let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that for now. Let's get rid of my DQ dates. Okay, so now we're just using the imported one. We're using the full direct query one. We'll get rid of that filter because that filter doesn't make any sense. And now let's try that again so we can get it nice and clear. So it's saying, give me my imported list of months. Give me my total amount again. So we're doing that same query. In this case, it's going back, it's trying to work out for everything. While it's thinking about that, I'll pull in this additional filter. Going to think about it because it's often doing it. And then we want to say we want to do 2019. Let's pick a different month, 06. Sure. Okay, so that went off and ran that query. If we go and have a look back in our SQL endpoint, just so I can hopefully show you this a little bit clearer, we can see what's actually going on. Okay. That doesn't make any sense as doing a join. What? Okay, fairly confusing, but fine. So what we'd normally expect is for this not to be doing that query at all. So we just expect to be seeing just the basic endpoint. That doesn't make any sense. Have I picked the wrong one I'm going in? That's the wrong Power BI. So what I'm trying to show you is if it doesn't actually realize how things are working. There we go. It'll help if I didn't have a direct query on that. Do that. Go and work that way. Messing around with things halfway through. And then we try and run that query properly. Oh, Power BI's crashed. Good times. Okay, come on. You can do it. Let's just build that out properly. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Gonna bring in from my recent sources. Gonna bring in that table again. Which is that one. This one should be import mode. What I'm trying to say is creating that composite model where one of the tables is in import mode, one of the tables is in direct query mode. And then if we create that relationship, which is, that should be that way. Gonna go off, create that relationship. There we go. That's what I'm trying to show you. Okay, and then we can do this same thing. So we're going to take that calendar month and just add it in. Oops. It's much faster now. It's actually in import mode. Take that total amount, which is then pushing it back down. And if we take that same calendar month, again, create a filter on it. Let's pick a different month this time. Let's go for 11 because we're in November. And then that's going to run that query. Okay, that's much more like what I was expecting. And we can see what's going on in here. Because the main thing is it doesn't have that context of that fact table can actually go and join to the other one. So if we're going, there we go. And that's kind of more the thing that we see coming through. So if it's trying to run queries, it can't just say, here's what you'd normally join to, because that's imported mode. That's kind of completely lost its context from how it speaks to the other piece. I think that was when we did the full one. If we just do a refresh, we should see the other query come in. No, we don't have it. Okay, so it cached the kind of local one, so it didn't even bother serving the one that was just picking one of those months because it already had that month back. Kind of makes sense. And yeah, it's still hitting partition, which is the interesting part. And actually, yeah, so wait, all those parts are they all just the different partition days within November. I'm just going insane. So actually, because this is partitioned by year, month, and day, it said, here are the 30 days that I need to actually sort of get inside November, which is how I'm doing it. So I'm actually still getting the same number of rows back. So in terms of what it's doing, fewer rows. Worrying, but okay. But in terms of performance, in terms of what it's actually, I picked a different month across the different rows. In terms of performance, in terms of what it's trying to do, you've got one where it's going to rely on the Spark engine to actually create these relationships. And historically, that would have gone bad. That would have performed really badly because it wouldn't have had the partition context to actually do dynamic partition pruning from my date dimension over into my fact table. And then this would actually have worked better, oddly. The fact that it has explicitly said, here's a list of partition keys. Here's a list of things I need you to filter this table by. So it's doing a straight select from this, just ignoring anything else. So weirdly, whether you're doing a composite model or whether you're doing an import model, whether you're doing a composite model that has imported dimensions and your actual base one, or you're doing a direct query and it's having to kind of piece it together on the fly, it actually doesn't make too much difference in terms of what the Spark engine does now that we've got dynamic partition pruning in there. And we can see that detail. Apologies for the confusion of getting that model together, but at least kind of, you can see how useful this is in terms of, from our different tools, what's firing data at it and being able to then say what actually happened in the Spark engine. We'd assume most business users wouldn't do that. If it's the kind of data analyst who would be writing some stuff in SQL Management Studio and then look at the execution plan, and they are good, kind of expert SQL users, then that kind of thing might be useful for them. That they might be kind of looking in here going, how does that work? Oh, okay, it's doing a broadcast join. Oh, it shouldn't be doing a broadcast join. But that might be a bit optimistic. There'll be a lot of people which are looking in here going, what took a while? Oh, that took longer than I expected. Why did that take so long? And just even at that level, that is super useful to see. Now, you do get a bit of junk in there. So anytime someone's just saying, which columns are there? What's in my Hive table? What are my available tables? You're going to see a query in here, which is essentially just saying, list my columns. But it is super useful for trying to dig into that and understand how that works. Cool. Okay, so that is the basics of how you plug Power BI in. So if you're using Power BI, you've got that Power BI connector. So you can say, here's the Power BI connector, use Active Directory or the PAT token, you get your list of Hive tables. If you are not using Hive, you cannot use external tools. You can't really use SQL Analytics. So this whole thing assumes that you're creating Hive databases, you're registering Hive tables, and you're working in that whole ecosystem. You've got things like table access control, which are not looked at, but that's where we can say, you, Active Directory user, can see that database and that database, but you can't see that database. And that will affect what they can see when they run that query. They'll only see the things that they can see. So if you're trying to build like a curated data model for people to be able to connect to and report, and they can only report on the things that they actually have access to, you need to be using table access control and building that into it. Now, when we start talking about doing some more advanced calculations and we put some DAX calculations and then we do some stuff in Power BI and then we look at the SQL that gets passed back, that's going to be when it's interesting to turn on the Photon engine and have a look and say, which kind of workloads is Photon really targeting and where's that helping? Is it just helping some of the caching and kind of things that we're doing? Or is it kind of the pure, there's the summation, the fact that we're doing sums, will be sped up by how it's doing kind of that bulk calculation. So it'll be interesting to start digging into it. But the main thing, that's how you connect. So your end users need to know to go to endpoints, need to know they have that server name and HTTP path, and then they can start browsing it like anything else, as long as you have curated a good Hive database and Hive tables for them to work with. Cool. Any questions? As always, let us know down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll put a video and a playlist and all that kind of stuff for you guys to click on. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.